All right, so the fourth resume that we're going to go through is a backend engineer. So again, I like to kind of zoom out and just really briefly, just kind of look at the overall layout. Again, this layout's pretty clean. I kind of see all the dates. The date formats are a little bit different. These dates are in bold. These dates are in italic, and instead they're putting the location in bold. The locations down here are also in bold, but I can also see that the font size is smaller down here than it is up here. So the first thing I would do is basically say, like, your name, you get one size of font. These headings are generally another size of font, and everything else on the page. Like, I would literally highlight everything else on the page and just go 10-point font on everything. And then I would go back and say, okay, this heading gets 12-point font, this heading gets 12-point font, this heading gets 12-point font, and maybe your name up here would get like 18 or 20-point font. So again, if you do !resume sample in chat, it'll give you the link to this Google Doc where you can kind of, if you want to borrow this, this is one way that you can kind of, grab like a header to paste into a Google Doc if you want to do your sort of header info that way, if you choose to. But then, basically everything on here is like 10-point font, except for these headings. These headings are 12, everything else is 10-point font. So that's the first thing I do when I make a resume is I just type everything up, I highlight everything, 10-point font on just all the things. So that way I've got a consistent font size on the whole page, and then I only change the headers and I only change my name as far as other font size goes. It just makes it easier for the reader. You don't want to have a ton of font changes where you're going back and forth between bold and italic and font sizes and font faces. You don't want to make it tiring to read. Subconsciously, it's tiring to read a resume where you're doing lots and lots of font changes all the time. Now, going from a color, from a link to a bold, that's not a big deal. But if you had like lots and lots of bold all over the page, the bold on here is reasonable. You're putting bold on your project name, you're putting a bold on how many hours it took you to build, putting a bold on these dates on your projects, which I'll talk about, putting bold on your titles and bold on the schools and things like that. I would say if you also had lots of bold on like JSON API and you had a bold on, leveraged inheritance, then that would start to feel like too much bold on the page. But as much as possible, you want to be pretty consistent as far as like how you're highlighting things. Like in this case, you're putting a bold on the date, but you're not putting a bold on this date. So again, it's starting to feel a little bit inconsistent around like how you're doing these things. So again, when I read a resume, I'm looking for a reason to say no. If you make it really easy for me to find what I'm looking for, you're more likely to be a yes or a maybe. But if it's hard to read your resume, the layout looks difficult to read, or I see lots and lots of font change, I'm going to start reading and go, nah, something feels off. I'm just going to say no on this one and move on to the next one because I've got hundreds of these to go through. So as much as possible, you want to grab my attention. You want to show the impact that you're going to have. Again, whatever kind of role. If you're going for a sales role, a marketing role, technical role, whatever, you need to show high relevance to my company and the kind of role to which you've applied. I'm way more likely to put you on that yes pile and give you a phone call. Why are Ruby and JavaScript in bold on the resume that I had up a second ago? So that's an example where you can use very selective bold if you want to highlight, like, the job post is asking for JavaScript, and so I want to make sure that I highlight JavaScript on here. So as you're reading through, you can be like, okay, cool, you're a JavaScript developer. More likely, though, what I would do is if I was looking for a JavaScript developer, is I wouldn't put JavaScript way down here in the list. If I'm looking for a JavaScript developer, then your resume better list JavaScript first. I want you to look like a JavaScript developer who knows Ruby and knows all these other things. But if you've got JavaScript way down the line, psychologically, when we read lists like this on a resume, we kind of mentally build up in our mind that I know React better than I know Ruby. I know Ruby better than I know TypeScript. I know TypeScript better than I know Python. I know all that stuff better than I know Node.js and Next.js because they're way at the end of the line. And so when we read these things left to right, we kind of think we know the stuff that you know the stuff on the left better than the stuff on the right. So this is where when you're applying for a job, you want to make sure that the stuff that you want to highlight to show that relevance, you're putting at the front of that list. Even if JavaScript really is like the fourth programming language that you know, and you maybe don't know it as well as Ruby, you want to look like a JavaScript developer who knows Ruby, not a Ruby developer who dabbles in JavaScript. Because if I'm hiring a JavaScript developer, I want to know that you're a JavaScript developer. Now, when you get to that interview, you can say, most of my study, most of the work that I've done has been in Ruby, but I know some JavaScript. Well, at that point, I'm already interviewing you, so I'm just going to keep talking to you. But you don't want to put JavaScript way down the line on this line. You don't want to put it way down the end of the list, because that makes me think that you really don't know it, and I'm less likely to call you. You put it at the front of the list, you look like a JavaScript developer who knows all of these other things. So the reason that I was putting bold on here is, like, if you really don't want to rearrange it, then you can just put a bold on here, because this specific job that you're applying to, they were looking for a JavaScript developer. So in that case, you want to look like a JavaScript developer. All right, cool. Let's get back to that fourth resume here. So having a summary on here is fine. I usually tell people, like, if you need more space on the page, that's the first thing to go. You don't have to write a summary like this. But if you do, this summary should be, you want this summary to really show the high relevance of why you're applying for this job. Like, what impact are you going to have at this job? Well, let's break this one down. You're a backend engineer. Well, you've already told me that, so you're already repeating yourself. Backend engineer with a passion for building new technologies. Well, you're not building the technology. You're building applications. Building a technology is something for a CS degree. This person went through a coding program. Building a new technology is like, you're not building a database. You're not building a server. You're building an application, which is run as a server, but you're not actually building the server layer like application. So be careful about the wording here. You're not actually building the technology itself. You're utilizing technology to build applications. You're building new applications in a collaborative environment, expertise in working with teams and clients to build efficient, non-biased, and robust applications. I would probably non-biased, past tense, and robust applications which enhance both user experience and client satisfaction. This is a really long sentence. And so when I look at this, I'm like, well, how does that help my company? You have expertise working with teams and clients to build efficient applications which enhance user experience and client satisfaction. Okay, former project manager bringing 4 years of project management experience in software development. So calling this out is fine if you're applying for a job where having some sort of project management could be beneficial. But if you're just applying as a backend engineer, backend developer, I'm going to see on your resume that you've done project management. You don't specifically have to call that out here. Calling it out here makes me think you still kind of want to dabble in that a little bit, because you're highlighting that in the summary here. So generally, what you want to provide in the summary, if you're going to put a summary on a resume, is you want to basically tell me in a couple of sentences, this is the impact that I'm going to have when you hire me. Like for me, I would write something like, if I was applying for another developer relations role, I would be putting something in here like, I'm an educator. I love sharing my knowledge. I love learning in public. I love building workshops and public speaking. Like, this is the impact that I have as a developer advocate or a developer relations person. By putting too much sort of generic stuff in here, like, I'm a software engineer. It's like, you already told me that. I like working in teams and collaboration and so on. That's fine. I am a team, so I hope that you've got that, but do you need to call that out specifically? If I've got that in the job post, then yes, call it out specifically. But if I don't specifically mention in the job post, like I'm looking for people who work in highly collaborative environments, you don't need to call this out. So you only want to put on the resume what I'm going to care to read, because then you're putting fewer words on there. It's easier to kind of read and easier to kind of pick out what I need to see on the resume. Skills block, you got languages and frameworks. I'd probably put a capital F on frameworks. Ruby, Rails, Active Record. Active Record's not a language or a framework. It's your ORM. I would probably put that elsewhere. Postgres, also not a language or a framework. So you're kind of putting things in the wrong spot. Testing, you got TDD with RSpec. Postman, yay. Keep Postman on the resumes for sure. VCR and Faker, those are fine. Those are all good tools. Workflow tools, consuming, exposing APIs, OOP, SRP, MVC. So recruiters reading this are going to be like, okay, alphabet soup. I have no idea what any of this means. That's probably okay. Hiring managers and other engineers that are looking over your resume, they're going to know what these things mean. Miro, probably not that relevant for a backend engineer. You know how to plan projects, and that's fine. You did project management, that's fine. But again, listing Miro on here makes me think that you still kind of want to dabble in project management. I probably would take that off. Working with Heroku is fine. OAuth 2, that's fine. So I would probably move some of these things into like a different sort of space, like workflow and tools. Like, yes, Git workflow, GitHub projects, that's fine. But I might actually put some of these technologies on like another bullet point of like technology tools, where this is more like just workflow. Workflow would be like consuming, exposing APIs, OOP, Git workflow, and so on. I might put like Heroku, Git, and then like Active Record and Postgres. I would put those on a different line of technologies because they seem a little bit out of place here. Software projects, I generally say like take the dates off of here. I know what sweater weather is. The fact that you did it in 18 hours, I don't know whether that impresses me or worries me because it's a big project. The fact that you did it in only 18 hours means you're either really good, or I would question a little bit like what you built and how. If you really did it in 18 hours, great. Most students that I worked on that project with took like at least a week and a half to build that thing out. But if you legit did it in 18 hours, that's fine. Most managers though, like most people looking at your resume, they don't care how long it took. Having the date on here is relevant if you need me to know that this was a really recent project that you built. So the fact that we're midway through October and you just built this in September, highly relevant. It's a modern application. You're going to be using modern technologies, modern APIs. If you list on here, like I did this one in September 2020, it's like, okay, well, that was a long time ago. Have you kept up with, Google Maps or MapQuest API? Have you kept up with Open Weather and how it's changed, over the last couple of years? Like, have you kept up to date on those technologies? So I'm a little bit, I could go either way, having the date of when you completed the project. As far as how many hours it took to build the project, I probably wouldn't put that on there because you wouldn't want them to look at that and go, okay, you spent like 8-hour days, you spent 3 days building this. It's like, how good could the project be if you only built it in 3 days, like 3 work days? Now they might look at the project and go, okay, this is a lot of code that you wrote in 3 days. You do give us their GitHub repo, but again, put it online somewhere. You did it with Postman. So go put that API online somewhere, and in your documentation say, go find that run in Postman button. Let me go interact with your API. Go put your API live somewhere. Let me go interact with that API through Postman. It's harder to do for a backend engineer, but that would be one way to let me experience what you've built, is by using Postman, using a tool like Postman. But otherwise, a lot of this looks fine. So this person went to Turing, which is where I taught, so they're following a lot of the career development stuff that I was a part of shaping and have kind of influenced over the years. So they know how to write good project descriptions and so on. Having a comma and then the parentheses looks a little out of place. I would probably get rid of the comma on here. Now football is like one of the early projects at Turing, reading in CSV data and so on. So this is where you need to really be careful about picking and choosing which projects you put on a resume. If you're applying for a job where you're going to be doing something like data analysis and you want to be able to pull large data files in and large data sets and doing lots of calculations and actually doing data analysis on that data, then yes, this would be a project that you would put on there. But if the company is like, if that's a big part of the role, I would probably put that project first because it's more relevant to what the company is doing. Where these two projects, like this is like a full stack kind of thing, but like which part of it did you work on? Sweater Weather is just a backend API that you built, and this is just a command line tool that you built. But if my company is doing data analysis, you probably want to list this one first because it's more relevant to the company. If they're hiring for a backend engineer, listing your capstone project here is fine, as long as you can kind of say like, this was my responsibility. Like I actually went and called these other APIs as part of building out the back end of this project. That I went and consumed some of these APIs. Is the sound breaking up? Let me know. I have had audio issues in the past. So, okay, it's maybe just that one person. I hope it's only that one person. But if other people are experiencing that, let me know. And I can see if I can change my microphone again. I've been having tons of hardware issues on this system lately. Cool. From there, we're getting into professional experience, non-technical experience, North American operations deployment for US Bank. You are a project manager here. If you're not applying for another project management role, you don't need to give me 5 bullet points about that job that are multi-line. Like you've got 3 bullet points here that are 4 bullet points here that are more than 1 line of text. You probably want to reduce this down to like 3 bullet points at most that don't go any further than like the date over here. So you want to fill up 2/3 to 3/4 of a line, and that's all. The fact that you've got 4 bullet points that are 2 lines each, this is way too much. Again, this is kind of telling me that you really enjoyed being a project manager, and that's still part of your identity as a developer, is that you still really like project management. It's good to show the relevance. It's good to show what you've got on here. The fact that you're also doing like, JSON API stuff is important, but I would probably leave that kind of stuff on there, agile and sprint planning and so on. But, is it important to tell me that you're doing, internal documentation for, these 2 things, these 2 auditing companies that, unless they are in some sort of auditing fintech type of technology company, they're not even going to know who these 2 companies are. And so this bullet point becomes meaningless to them. So again, you want to show the relevance to the company. So delivered point of sale hardware and software solutions and advice to clients from hardware testing, QA, and so on. Again, if that's relevant to the company where you're applying, leave that bullet point on there. But I would probably advise this person, like, try to get this down to 3 bullet points at most, 3/4 of a line of text each, and like give me the most impactful, like this is why it mattered that I did this JSON API error troubleshooting. Like I did, API troubleshooting to increase performance by 20% or something like that, or worked with the team to increase performance by 20%. Like, tell me the impact of it, not just the thing that you did, but tell me the impact. But this is too much to tell me on a resume. You want to look like a software developer who happens to do a little bit of project management. But again, you're kind of screaming on here, I'm a project manager, and you want to reduce that as much as possible. Education on here looks fine. So again, kind of looks fine. The dates line up. This date kind of sticks out to the right a little bit more, like the 7 on 2017 looks like it kind of pushed into that right margin a little bit. I would probably put the locations next to the school, next to the name, and then pull this date up on the line where you've got Englewood here. Pull these dates up where you've got the locations. Put the location over here. Now, in the case of Turing, this is actually a remote program. So I would actually put remote on here. Turing's headquarters was in Denver, but it's a remote school, so I would probably just call it remote now. And then you've got commas on these, which makes it feel like you forgot to mention something else. You are pushing the dates over here, but again, I would probably just put 3-letter months on here, like APR for April, MAR for March, and things like that. And I would, in this case, I would also say March 2022 to November 2022, because you do the year on these other dates as well. So just be consistent about that. All right. So